You know, one of the absolute best parts of making YouTube videos is when one of your videos blows up and every single week people come in and comment on the same shit over and over again. It really hammers in some of the most important points in life. I mean, this is how I studied for pharmacy school, so I know from experience that all of this is effective. What I guess you can say is I've heard the commotion about a certain Sonic game that came out a couple years ago, and I'm gonna address it head on. Hello, Frontiers is not a Breath of the Wild clone enthusiast. My name is RidersDX, and today I'm going to address my comments from this video I made about Frontiers. You should definitely check it out. I mean, clicking on this video is essentially you signing a contract, and if you don't do it, then you'll just have to get. But for the sake of you being here now, here's a quick recap. This video ended up being a mini retrospective on the ways Sonic's image and tone has been mismanaged for the better part of the last 2 decades. But then it rounds up with a triumphant return to form that we're seeing now with more excitement than ever surrounding my favorite franchise. But in the midst of this discussion, I talked about various games in the franchise that are what I call trend chasers. Because for a long period of time, Sega had what in hindsight was a severe lack of faith in the brand of Sonic. So as a result, many games during this period were trying to squeeze Sonic into whatever best-selling title had come out in the year or two prior in an effort to bring Sonic back to the relevance he once had. Putting aside the fact that game quality was a major factor here, one of the games I of course mentioned was Sonic Frontiers. And if you're watching this video, you're probably very familiar with the claim that I'll be dissecting here. Sonic Frontiers is a Breath of the Wild clone. There's a lot of statements that trigger Sonic fans, and this is certainly a meaty one to add to the list. Watching back my video, I can certainly see that this is exactly what it looks like I'm saying. But what am I actually trying to say? Well, because I'm an obnoxious brat, I'm going to tell you in the worst way possible. 2 truths and a lie. Can you spot the lie based on my explanations? Probably, but let's just do the bit and explore what I've brewed. Sonic Frontiers was coming up at a very interesting time for me, a time when I myself was sort of questioning where my own YouTube channel should be going after a few years of up and down successes here. In the most obnoxiously poetic way, Sonic and I were both going through a similar journey. A journey where we were trying to find the next step that would lead to both of our own ascensions in our fields. For me, we're still figuring that out, but I'm getting closer. But for Sonic, that was that initial gameplay review of Sonic Frontiers. And everything from this game's initial announcement to the eventual review spelled out an exact replica of the rollout for Breath of the Wild. So we're not talking about the game itself yet. We're talking about the lead up to the game and how this built up sort of anticipation was already writing this game into a tight open world corner. Remember how Breath of the Wild was initially reviewed to us through this ominous looking clip of the fields in the game? It was one of the least informative pieces of information we could have ever gotten for a game review, not to mention anticlimactic. I'm not dragging Nintendo though because the numbers don't lie, they ate. Sonic Frontiers had a shorter road trip to release, but nonetheless was done in a very similar way. Starting with an initial teaser that gave extremely little information about the game and let people speculate wildly in terms of what it could be, we would not get actual footage and a clear-cut idea of what this game would be until a year later when Sega, for some godforsaken reason, partnered with IGN to review the game. It's like Sega literally hates themselves. But upon the initial review of both games, a large focus was clearly put on the open world, but not just the open world, but the mystery and vastness of it. You just have to look at the teasers for Sonic Forces and Frontiers to realize that these 2 games had extremely different approaches to how they were presented to the public. Forces was marketed more traditionally, with flashy images and high-speed antics, just with a war cosplay draped over the edges. Frontiers, meanwhile, took the exact opposite approach, revealing very little of its intentions and content at first, and then just dropping 8 minutes of seemingly nothing but Sonic prancing around in an abandoned island. What Frontiers did was practically exactly what Breath of the Wild did, used intrigue and mystery to reel people into the game, which I have to admit was an effective strategy. Until the feedback came in. You see, this initial footage was not well received by the public. People thought the gameplay looked boring, stale, and completely underwhelming, especially for a Sonic game. In people's defense though, all we had was just this random footage of Sonic doing puzzles and traveling up a tower in a tranquil fashion. It did not show off the high-speed action people have come to expect with Sonic, and it was getting people really concerned. The reason this approach worked for Breath of the Wild was because The Legend of Zelda has built up a reputation of consistently churning out quality titles, so no one was really concerned with that Breath of the Wild would turn out bad, because there simply was too much history and brand brand buildup and recognition for that to be a serious start. As for Sonic though, I really don't have to get into that. I mean, my last video practically recited everything I could be saying here, but bottom line, people don't trust Sega to make a good Sonic game, so any weird sign you might see is reason enough for most people to panic, which is unfortunate. But nonetheless, this is a summary of why, at least from a marketing standpoint, this game was doomed, because it was trying to follow a model that simply doesn't work for Sonic. Sonic is just too unreliable of a franchise for something like this to just skate by without much blowback. I'm just going to say it now, this is the truth. You can try to refute me all you want. I'm aware that the marketing did shift after all this initial stuff had happened, but that first impression is always going to be the most impactful one you can have. And once that seed of negativity seeps into someone's brain, that's going to be the place their head goes to first before considering anything else. And that is just reality of life. But now let's start cooking and go into the other two statements I have. One is a truth and one is a lie. Can you tell me which is which? Sonic Frontiers as a game borrows way too much from Breath of the Wild. I mean, sure, you do have the classic Sonic the Hedgehog mechanics here, such as the floating rails in the skies, but this entire game is just coated in that Breath of the Wild aesthetic and vibe, and while it stands out within the library of Sonic games, it is just another example of Sonic cosplaying as the hot thing in gaming currently, and further pushes that identity crisis that Sonic has been suffering from for more than half of its history now. The music has this calm symphonic feel to it with its small techno tinge to emphasize that mystery and intrigue, which is great and all, but it's literally a copy-paste from Breath of the Wild. And while the grassy fields really do echo the main focus of Breath of the Wild's marketing too, the inclusion of puzzles certainly doesn't help. Not saying open world Sonic shouldn't have puzzles, but it is another similar looking aspect. To be fair, this game does have other qualities to it that are uniquely Sonic, the cyberspace levels, the epic bosses, the narrative, but none of it is nearly enough to overpower the Breath of the Wild stench this game is coated in, and it truly fails to stand on its own due to this. Now let's go to my other point, which is the fact that Sonic Frontiers borrows practically nothing from Breath of the Wild, and that this game does more than enough to stand on its own feet as a separate title, and that anyone that insists this is a Breath of the Wild clone is simply extremely thick in the head and refuses to give Sonic Team their props. Being able to run at high speeds through such luscious environments, feeling as close as to how Sonic does, just speeding through large spaces of land and effortlessly traversing obstacles is truly a riveting experience. And sure, the game does share similarities to Breath of the Wild aesthetically, but does Breath of the Wild own symphonic instrumentation or barren wastelands? Sonic Frontiers certainly does a lot of its own stuff to set itself apart, such as the narrative that does a great job at referencing previous Sonic adventures in particular, and of course the cyberspace levels to provide that typical 3D Sonic experience. So now that you have my 2 points, what do you think is the truth versus the lie? I can wait. Okay, that's enough. So the answer is both, and neither at the same time. Yes, let me hear it. That's not what I said was gonna happen. I'm just another cheap ass clickbaity content creator. I'm sure the ears are gonna be ringing once this comes out. But let me actually dive into what I mean, because yes, I think the true answer lies in the middle between these two viewpoints, and I'm gonna challenge the internet to have a nuanced discussion about this, which I know is like asking a toddler to read an encyclopedia. So believe me, I know how this is going to go down. I really do stand firm in my belief that this game borrows too much from Breath of the Wild. I just think that especially after playing through the whole game, the whole soundtrack, storyline, and aesthetics of the game really doesn't do itself any favors in crafting its own identity. But the caveat to that though is that this game does have qualities to it that does make its own game, and to me, I ultimately feel that this is one of the most solid 3D Sonic adventures we have despite the above. The truth is, despite the game's large Breath of the Wild undertone, that doesn't discount the fact that this is a very solidly built Sonic game and serves as a great foundation for what Sonic could be in the future. If you watch my previous video about Sonic's journey to this current point in time, I pointed out multiple examples of games that I feel truly understand this franchise's strengths and capitalize off of them. The adventure games are the most prominent example for me, and also the most easily translated one to today's day and age. They embody a mix of both fantastical and realistic looking environments, along with a narrative and tone that, while serious with high stakes, doesn't forget to include a little fun and cheekiness, which Sonic was known to have plenty of since the very beginning with those 90s commercials. Frontiers to me sort of falls into the category where Shadow and 06 lie when it comes to those factors. It takes itself a little too seriously, which I can understand why based on the direction and setup for the game. I mean, Sonic is literally isolated from even his friends throughout the entirety of Frontiers. It's supposed to feel very lonely and isolating, and there just isn't a lot of room for any playful banter like the adventure games had. I think in it's important for a franchise to be able to branch out and try different things, see what works and doesn't work, and convene for the next title. But I think it's also important to acknowledge the one that doesn't work, and while Frontiers does a lot of things right, it's not the peak of Sonic that I know Sega can achieve. With that being said, I really like Frontiers. Listen, it may not have been my favorite narrative in the Sonic franchise, but it plants a lot of different seeds that expands upon the Sonic lore I know and love, and just seems to be the first mainline game forever that actually loves and celebrates its past, besides Generations, which was literally a game made just for that. The Final Horizon in particular is one of my favorite DLC updates I've ever played across any game. This package felt like Sega actually saw what people gravitated towards in the original game and just gave an even bigger and better version of that. I also think the gameplay is fun. I mean, sure, I would love more lively environments and maybe less puzzle solving and more traditional Sonic action, but it is also just a plain joy to be able to run across a huge vast land this freely as Sonic. It's not perfect, but I think the inherent idea is just that good, and Sonic Team did a good enough job that those foundational perks of this gameplay style were able to shine through with flying colors. It's also the first ambitious Sonic game I've seen in a while that actually somewhat succeeds at being one. It's not every day Sonic Team takes a huge gamble of a brand new idea and actually does a good job executing it. So sorry if I seem like I'm praising what would be expectation from another developer, but that is the honest goddamn truth about my feelings towards this game. Sonic Frontiers is a good time, and I can acknowledge the fact that though it isn't enough of a Sonic game to me due to its huge influences from Breath of the Wild, it is still a game I really enjoyed and cannot wait to see expanded upon in future titles, like the White World and Shadow Generations. I cannot wait to see what that brings to the table. Speaking of Shadow Generations, what looked like a simple add-on to an already solid Sonic game is turning into what I believe is a natural and great evolution of the work started with Sonic Frontiers. It still maintains that serious and dark tone that Frontiers had, but it incorporates a lot of history from previous Sonic games and really seems like a gigantic celebration of what Sonic is all about, which is these epic, death-defying enemies and stakes that seem really crazy and really unreasonable for a game like this. And you know, I think Shadow the Hedgehog is just a perfect vessel for this sort of game at this time in Sonic's career. With Shadow, you can actually go a little darker because Shadow is a dark character, so the cheekiness and the sassiness of Sonic isn't actually as necessary here, this being a Shadow adventure. So in this case, if they want a story that's just as dark as Frontiers, if not darker, then they can actually go for it because that would actually suit who Shadow the Hedgehog is. But I think Shadow Generations mixed in with Sonic Generations, which has that cheekiness, which has that fun playful side, is going to make this the ultimate Sonic package and just a great celebration of what Sonic is and what he's all about. It expands upon the good things about Frontiers, taking in that white space and giving us more of that open world gameplay, but it also takes the boost levels and makes them really fun. I'm looking at the level design for the gameplay and it looks really solid. It definitely looks like a step up from the cyberspace levels. And so I think Shadow Generations is really just taking all the qualities that people love about Sonic, especially from Sonic Frontiers in particular, and it's just expanding upon that, giving us more lore, giving us more good written storylines. I really cannot get over the fact that Maria and General Robotnik are going to be major parts of the storyline here. Like, it's just a Sonic fan's dream come true. We're no longer trying to chase down what everyone else is doing. Now we're just diving into what Sonic is and using that as the main appealing factor. And I'm just so proud of Sega for finally getting it and finally just letting Sonic be Sonic. And Shadow Generations just looks to be the closest we're getting to that since the adventure games. And I'm excited because, again, they're taking exactly what worked with Sonic Frontiers and all the Sonic games that came before it and are putting it into this one and maxing it up. And what can I say? I think Shadow Generations is going to be a home run success and I cannot wait to see the end product. I hope this makes things a little more clear at least, because I know that people had this idea that I did not like Sonic Frontiers, and I don't blame you all because I was looking in my channel history and I actually realized that I didn't actually make a proper video about Sonic Frontiers after it came out, and I'm kind of shocked about that. I guess I just thought people weren't interested in my thoughts on the game. So here you go. This is kind of like a mini discussion about what I thought about Frontiers. If you want like a more in-depth discussion about Frontiers in general and maybe like a more traditional retrospective, then let me know that in the comments too. But all right, y'all, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do y'all think about Sonic Frontiers? Do you agree with my analysis in terms of it borrowing too much from Breath of the Wild? Let me know why or why not. Shadow Generations is coming out really soon. We're in October now. It's coming. So get hyped. But this is Riders, riding out.